Hello again everyone, welcome back to the channel. Now today we are exploring beyond the normal reaches of Roman Britain. We're even going beyond the islands of Scotland to a place that has fascinated scholars for over 2,000 years. A place that ancient writers described as the very edge of the earth. Thule. It's a name that pops up again and again, shrouded in mystery, with ancient writers describing it as being the very edge of the known world. But what was the island of Thule? Was it a real island, a garbled tale of an explorer who had gone too far, or was it a product of the imagination, born from half-bred stories and unfamiliar seas? Well, let's try and find out as this week I explore the island of Thule, the last land of the ancient world. So who gave us our earliest description of the island of Thule? Well, that honour falls to one Pytheas of Massalia, a Greek explorer who was setting sail around 330 BC. He set off from modern-day Marseille and made his way north through the Atlantic, exploring lands that many Greeks had only heard vague rumours about. Pytheas is our first classical writer to write about Britain in any detail. In fact, he gives us the origins of the name Britannia. But it's his journey beyond Britain that has made his name legendary. Supposedly, Pytheas sailed 6 days north of Britain until he reached a land that he called Thule, the furthest reach of the ancient world. And he doesn't just mention it, he also describes its seas, its climate, and also its strange natural phenomena. Pytheas spoke of a region where the sea became a viscous mixture, neither water nor ice, and modern scholars see this as an early description of sea slush or drift ice, something that you might come across in the North Atlantic Ocean. He also described the odd summer daylights at high latitudes, and how the nights at Thule were incredibly short, whilst the days were incredibly long. And what this tells us is that he either had first-hand knowledge of, or had heard tales of the lands beyond Britain. The tragedy is that Pytheas's book, On the Ocean, is lost to us. Everything we have on him comes from later writers, who are either just quoting him, criticising him, or trying to summarise him. And as a result, Pytheas is one of the most controversial figures in ancient geography, a pioneering explorer to some, and a liar to others. But regardless of whether he actually went there, what Pytheas did do was firmly plant the idea of Thule into the ancient mind, and the Romans never stopped talking about it. Once Pytheas had introduced the idea of Thule to the world, later writers kept the idea alive, but they often disagreed over what it was and where it was. The Greek geographer Strabo, writing in the 1st century AD, was utterly dismissive of Pytheas, calling him a fantasist who made up his stories. But despite the fact that Strabo was calling Pytheas a liar, what he did do was repeat Pytheas's description of Thule, so despite being a skeptic, he managed to keep the myth alive. Pliny the Elder, ever the encyclopedist, was more inclined to believe Pytheas's tale of Thule. He even quotes the 6-day journey north, and places Thule close to a frozen ocean called the Mare Congelatum. And it's because of Pliny the Elder that the Romans started to see Thule as a real place, even if it was a distant one. Tacitus gives us one of the most tantalising references. In his Agricola, when he recounts the Roman fleet circumnavigating Britain in 83 AD during Agricola's invasion of Scotland, he talks about how the Roman fleet was able to see the island of Thule. What did they actually see? A mirage? A distant headland? We have no idea. But what it does show is that to Roman commanders and to Tacitus, Thule was very much a part of the mental geography of the north. Later geographers repeated the idea of Thule, with some seeing it as an island and others as a full region. And some pushed it so far north that it became symbolic, a marker of the edge of the known world. Interestingly, we do have a couple of mentions of the people of Thule, one of which comes from the Roman poet Silius Italicus, who describes the people of Thule as being blue-painted people, perhaps trying to link them to the Picts of Scotland or even Caesar's account of the Britons. For centuries now, scholars have tried to pin down exactly what Thule is, but in honesty, we don't know. But we can look at some of the leading candidates. Perhaps the most famous suggestion is Iceland, which does fit some of the clues. It is incredibly far north, it does produce floating slush on its seas, and its summer days also fit Pythias' descriptions. However, Pythias doesn't describe any volcanic or geothermal activity, and also Iceland would be a bit far for a 6-day journey north in an ancient ship. So another option is Norway, as some have suggested that perhaps Pythias made it to the Norwegian coast. It would make sense, the short nights and the long summer days would make sense in Norway, but ancient writers, well, most of them anyway, thought of Thule as an island, which of course Norway is not. A more conservative interpretation would be the Shetland Islands. They are reachable within 6 days, they are very far north, and they do experience very long dramatic days in the summer. But some people have suggested that they aren't otherworldly enough to inspire the awe in Pythias' account. For some ancient authors, Thule is less of a specific place and more an overarching term, a sort of catch-all for the unknown territories beyond Britain, and through this lens, perhaps Scandinavia, the Arctic coast, even the coast of Greenland could be part of the same singular myth. There is the possibility that Pythias reached a land that we simply can't identify today, perhaps a land whose ancient name has been lost to time. So in short, the mystery remains unsolved. Even though the Romans never reached Thule, the idea of Thule was still incredibly important to them. It became the ultimate frontier, the place where the known world ended and the unknown began. For the Romans, Britain was already remote. The Orkneys, for example, were even more remote, and Thule, that was on the edge of the maps. That was the edge of everything familiar. Roman geographers often used Thule as a boundary marker. They placed it at the top of their maps, often slightly detached, as if it's floating around the edge of the known world. What's fascinating to me, though, is the fact that even though the Romans never went to Thule, they kept mapping it, they kept including it, despite the fact that they had very little information on it, a piece of inherited knowledge, or at least inherited belief, from the Greek world. It tells us a lot about how geography worked in antiquity. The Romans didn't ask for proof of every place, so if an older Greek source said something existed, they very rarely questioned it. And as a result, when the Roman Empire was expanding in all directions and travelling further and further north, they just accepted that Thule must be a place. One of the most compelling aspects of Thule is the fact that it straddles the line between reality and myth. We don't know if Pythias went to an island called Thule, but that's not as important as what it came to represent, the edge of human knowledge. In medieval and Renaissance cultures, Thule evolved further, becoming a poetic symbol of any far and distant land. The phrase Ultima Thule, meaning the furthest Thule, entered the language as meaning the furthest reaches of travel and understanding. Even today, the phrase Ultima Thule has this meaning, with NASA naming the Kuiper Belt object Arrokoth Ultima Thule before its official naming, because it lies on the edge of our solar system, echoing this Greek idea of the remote frontier. This shows how enduring Pythias' legacy is. An island, perhaps misunderstood, perhaps imagined 2,300 years ago, is still impacting the language of exploration. So after all this, what is Thule? An island on the edge of the known world? A misunderstanding of northern geography? Or a tantalising blend of fact and fiction, born from a single Greek explorer whose work is sadly lost to us? In truth, we may never know, but it's the very mystery of Thule that makes it so fascinating. For the Greeks, it was a distant corner of the world. For the Romans, it was the edge of understanding. And for us, it's a mystery that's still unsolved. But thank you very much for watching. Please remember to like, comment and subscribe. It helps immensely. And I'll see you on the next one. Ciao for now.